And for a short while, I was also in Lviv. You say, yes, Lviv is the Ukraine name, I think. So what was my excitement to be working in Ukraine was that there were many initiatives, especially from mathematics, operational research, and computer science, that was really a big contribution to the international community of educational theories, especially the work by Vygotsky and, of course, the famous poets like Shevchenko, who was in every classroom, a picture of the famous poet. So based on that, let's say, experience, I asked myself, well, what is now in this difficult period for your country? What is maybe a perspective that I could deliver? And it is the corner, and I will present my country too. It is the corner that in our thinking, we have the tradition that analytic thinking is a good thing. We see it as the most important tool of the human mind to reason and to, let's say, to also to do the brainstorming. But conceptual thinking is, I think, an extra quality that is strange enough. You may not believe it, but in young children, you see a high level of conceptual thinking. I will give an example for that. This our country, talking about etymology. Holland is the nickname for a hollow country. We have a lot of water inside, especially here in the inner lake called IJsselmeer. And I'm located in the east part, Enschede, close to the border with Germany. What I would like to say is that learning was for a long time was a very special phase in our human development. In young times, people went to school and we say that's learning, and later they have to work. And that's still the case. Only the phase of learning has extended to 20 years, to 30 years. If you like to become a surgeon, you need at least to be 30 years and let's say 24 years in education before you can do anything. You see here the city of Rotterdam, and we are very happy to work also with projects like Oksana is participating. It's ERASMUS that is for exchanging theories, best practices, and to help each other. The topic I would like to bring forward is STEAM. It's an acronym for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics. And it is not really new, because already in the 60s of the previous century, we did thematic learning, thematic education. That means we don't limit ourselves and we don't limit our teachers, our students to think in one discipline. We say, for real thinking, you need to include any type of knowledge that you have. Don't be afraid to jump from biology to, let's say, physics, or to mathematics, or to geography, or to psychology. If you see the topic like COVID pandemics, it really needed an integral thinking, like economical, psychological, etc., and medical, of course. So this is a plea for a new innovation in education, and also a plea for future work and for future working and living together. So this is the STEM pyramid. It says that we need to include any discipline that might be helpful. The key values for learning, before I go into details, I would say, normally we say learning is an intellectual process. It's about knowledge and skills. But also the second point is that a lot of learning is spent to social loyalty, also societal commitment, societal awareness, and missions in life. A very good tradition already is the so-called problem-based learning, where students are encouraged to ask themselves, who do I want to be? What do I want to contribute to society, to my neighbors, to my village, to anything that's in life? The third point is that societal awareness is the case, hopefully, in education. We see it's not only learning, it's also becoming friends, understand each other, and to become a citizen for many good reasons, of course. The last point is that personality, that's not so much covered in our curricula. We say, yes, by learning, by doing, you become a person who has value in life, hopefully. But I think we see more and more that education starts to say it's an explicit point of the agenda. If the atmosphere in the classroom is not good, if there is too much competition, for instance, if there is too much social distance, then it's not good. So ethics and responsibility are the key values. At this moment, I am helping one of my previous students, Menno Bot, Oksana knows him, and Irene. They are in a different city, but they are involved in many European projects like Scalability, New Work, EduSims Team, Power of Creativity, etc. And of course, the project with Germany, Digital Learning in the Digital Family. So this is a wide spectrum of activities, and I try to find commonalities. And I think what we see at this moment, we see creativity becomes more important. And that means we do not only learn to copy the skill of the teacher, but there should be, and in many cases it happens, there is a mutual dialogue between students and teachers. That's, I think, the hope. I was writing a book since 2 years. It's on the market, Sources for a Better Education. And the question behind the book is that if a teacher has experience after 5 or 6 years, the teacher might ask, what's next? Should I become a school leader? Should I be a curriculum designer? Or should I help other teachers? And my exercise in this book is to say, well, maybe you should become an even better teacher. It's not that you are not a good teacher now, but there's always some dimension to become a more effective teacher and a more, let's say, productive teacher. And that was the question in this book. So feel happy. You can always send me an email if you want some information. I'm happy to do that on a free basis. Robotics is an important point that students, what we see nowadays, like the mobile phone, students, they have some passion to do something with robots, as if they are living creators, and that triggers the mind, like they play with their pets, the dogs or the cats. Also, the robot becomes a kind of partnership to play. This is a typical situation in a project where we help each other between countries. I have always experienced that if you have an international meeting, the partners always have to say something about their uniqueness. And it's not teaching, but it's just saying, what is your intuition? And then it might help your colleagues abroad. This is one of the projects I was just mentioning. Oksana is also here. It was lately in Deventer. So this is one of the projects for, especially for German situations where refugees from other countries arrive, and life might not be interesting because it's a different culture, and a new concept of learning might be welcomed. We see here we have hard skills. That's on the left side. It is like mathematics, analytics, etc. And the other side, the right side, is the soft skills. It's much more communication. It's much more, let's say, also empathy, intuition, which are very important parts of life nowadays. Then we have another dimension, which is called the AI. We did it from the late 70s to make some programs to make a smart teacher. Teacher was looking to the structure of the knowledge of the students, but now it becomes more pragmatic. And we heard that Google will very soon come to a new interface where if you type in a keyword, it will not respond by links to other websites, but it will start a dialogue with you, what you mean, and it will have some social statistics, what people believe. So if you ask what is a good shop for training my body, let's say exercising, the system will reason about many experiences, and you get a more human response than what you did before, or what you got before. Here you see what students typically do. They have a wide fantasy, and especially when children are not so much obsessed by getting a good high grade for education. Because how do you get a high grade? It's just by listening carefully what the teacher says and answer in the same line of the teacher. I don't say copying the teacher, but being very keen to show that you understand what the teacher said. You see here a kind of drawing. We call it typically a schematic drawing, and it is always open for any idea what comes into your mind. And I think we should nurture that. We should not destroy it by saying limit yourself to what was asked, but always have an opening for the free associations of students. We see that also in robotics, where a kind of creative effort is always needed. We see the coming new devices, we call it the goggle, where you have spatial impression. Now the question is, for education, what's the contribution of spatial awareness? I will come back to that later. In general, I would say education is going to be more and more a double loop process. It's not only the learning between the teacher and the student, we call that single loop learning, but if you take one step back, then you may ask, why do we do it anyway? What's the goal of education? Is it just to prepare for the labor market, or is it to do more? Is it to do, for instance, to change society or to find new values in life? Sustainability may be part of it. And so the learning might be, how can we change the school so that we become even a better society? That is the double loop learning. We see here let's say a hierarchy that starts with working teams. And also I think it's the case in Ukraine. Collaborative learning has been very important for maybe 50, 60 years already. Then we have the second step, it's the communities of practice. If you look how teachers learn, how teachers can learn from each other to become a better teacher, to share information and to see the best practices. We see that the community idea is very important. The top nowadays is the social network. So social media become really the oil for awareness. Many teachers, they hate social media because they say, my students are spoiling their time. But my opinion is that social media are very important. Of course, like the TV in the beginning in the 70s, TV was used, people were looking to the TV 6 hours a day in the evening, which was spoiling the time. And similar happens with the social media. But if you use it in a strategic way, if I have some doubt about some keyword, about some new project, I go to social media and it helps me a lot. I think this is an attitude for students as well. So we see the reality of the school is changing, but the mentality behind the school is not so much changing. And if you think about the STEAM, what I just was introduced, so the integration and thematic approaches, it has the two sides. There is a bottom-up strategy on the left side. By good examples, we go up into instruction, into curriculum, and then we have a policy we should make a report how to disseminate, and on the right side, we see a top-down process where we try to generalize, to disseminate, and to multiply our understanding down to any situation that needs STEAM. That's essentially is every school, but of course we need the ministry, we need school leaders, we need the parents even to make it acceptable and to show the value. We see many patterns that's coming up from neural theory. We see computational thinking, for instance. That's a notion that after we do the programming, we hope that we start thinking in a more systematic way. That's complementary to, I would say, creative thinking, because creative thinking escapes from any methodology. There are some methods for creative thinking, like de Bono says, we have the thinking heads, but computational thinking is a rather algorithmic way to benefit even more from the deep learning in our minds. Deep learning happens when we are really free, when we really free to increase our thinking modes. So you see some publications, and I will make a summary of the main screen, so you don't need to write. I will send it to Oksana later. Important, I think, is that we are in a transition. On the left side, you see the book mill from the 15th century. It was mainly to be very flexible, to switch between books, mainly Bibles at the time, to compare the Bible interpretations. That is the accessibility. On the right side, you see the Sephirot. It's the tree of the wisdom. And why was it used? It was mostly used in the Jewish tradition before reading the Talmud. The habit was to think, close your eyes, and think about the values. Who do you want to be? What is honesty? What is purity? What is generosity? What is altruism? What is good life? What is beauty? What is beautifulness? So this is a kind of value representation that makes you ready to learn about a new topic. And that's what we see now with conceptual representations like concept mapping, mind mapping, etc. Mostly it's a schematic representation. Schematics was really influenced by the design of the London Underground map. In fact, it's not anymore a map. It's not topologically correct. It is just a schematic. If you ask, what line should I take to go from Oxford Circus to Old Street? And then you can see, I can follow the red line and change here at Bank, or I can take the blue line and make a change in St. Pancras, for instance. So it is a navigational tool. It's not in the right topography, but it helps to take the right line. And the metaphor is for learning which communities could I join best in order to become a better learner, in order to have a better network. So there's a similarity between transport and social networking. Here you see the evolution. On the right side, you see the technical skills. Those were very important. They were the dominant factor in the last century, in the previous century. Technical skills, because it was an industrial time. And still, of course, we need industries. But we see the difference is made by human skills. That's communication. That's how to understand my colleague. It's to make me a team player rather than a soloist. And on the left side, we go even one step higher. We say, in the future, we need to be conceptual thinkers. What does it mean, conceptual thinker? I will focus on that. First, I give you an example of what was the normal way of teaching. My grandfather was teaching the carpentry, and you can see the students were learning from each other. We call it vicarious learning, learning by learning from your colleague. But this is an example for conceptual thinking, and I would like to offer you to accept this problem. Here are three shops side by side. three shops that sell the same thing, vegetables. The left shop says highest quality. The shop on the right side says lowest prices. The shop in the middle, of course, is desperate, is asking, how should I announce myself? If you ask it to academic students, or even politicians or very wise people, they will say, well, make a combination, highest price, lowest prices, highest quality or something, or the shop that is very quick to serve you, or whatever. But children, 4 years old, 6 years old, they might say, okay, the question mark here, just say entrance. Maybe now you are laughing because it's of course not very polite, but it's a very simple psychology to see the full constellation and say, what's the most easygoing solution? And of course, your neighbors will complain, but anyway, it's the first approach to think in a creative way. Here you see all types of dimensions like critical thinking. Critical thinking is important because it is really a way to make the learner a better learner. How do you do that? Not only by asking why, no, it's mostly is to say, try to imagine what it means. So if I say, for instance, a typical thing is the etymology. When I came for the first time in your country, in Kiev, I heard the word bistro. Bistra means quickly. Maybe it's more Russian than Ukrainian, but anyway. And I asked myself, what is the meaning that we call the shops, the restaurants, bistros? And then I found out it's because they can act so quickly. And the story was about Napoleon, who was defeated, and the name for quick, serving quickly, was bistro. So that's a kind of keenness on the underlying meaning. And what you see here is a machine built by students in secondary schools to experiment with kinematics and force computation. And you can control the machine by the sliders here. And it's when it works, it starts oscillating. And of course, you have to cope with oscillation, and that's why you can modify the forces and the positions of the hydraulic engines. Same is here to cope with physical dimensions. And we call it not only simulations, it's kind of modeling where you can really play with the tools. And you learn by doing, by just having the guts to say, I change one of the parameters and see how it affects the machine and the performance. Similar with interactive physics here, you can see the force on the pin when the stones are downloaded, and you can see certain force distribution, and to make a safer machine. Same with kinematics. You can, if you have to cope with dilemmas, so you have limited space, what type of construction do you make to make a certain shape, like the green triangle on the right side? So that's a kind of tool now. We have many tools, so you can experiment, and I will give you some other examples. These are tools: interactive physics, kinematic simulations, electronic workbench, crocodile electronics, 3D modeling tools, and concept mapping. Interesting project was the Construit project for future computer programmers at the level of universities. The idea was that if you want to make if you have the task to make a program for, let's say, organizing the traffic or preparing food or to do the security in financial sense, then it's not only that you need the tools and know the tools. It's not only that you need to understand what your customer wants, but you need to understand what is the total constellation in the application field. What are type of transactions? what are trade-offs between time and space, for instance? What is the kind of checks and balances that need to be taken? And that is done by a system. In the Construct project, we made a huge program where you can really work with tools like you see here, especially for gaming. Now, this is my first synthesis. It is the triangle that shows learning, working, and playing. I've already showed you the tools. You could say that's a kind of playing tool. Does it necessarily promote learning? My view is, yes, it helps in learning. It's not a complete learning, but it helps you to open the mind and to have the courage to see what you don't understand yet. So the curiosity is promoted by a playing attitude. Now, the other side is from learning and the working. The link between learning and working is, I think, quite obvious, because before working, you need to learn. But also during the learning, you need a working attitude to do project-based learning, for instance. You need a good discipline, and you don't need to be shy. You know it, because I think it's typical in Eastern European countries. There is a higher, I would say, attitude to see learning as a serious business. In many schools in Western Europe, for instance, in the Netherlands, we see a very mild discipline in the schools. And I think that's the reason that the formal education like mathematics and physics is scoring quite low. It's not high on the PISA escalator. I think it was, and maybe still is, in countries like Ukraine, is much higher in the formal sense. But I would like to draw your attention to the link between playing and working, because what we see, at least in the Netherlands, and I would like to know how it's in Ukraine, but if the young people go from the school, they start working, about 15 or 20% has a burnout after 2 years. Within 2 years, that's of course a waste of talent. It's damaging the self-confidence of the young persons. That's why I say learning is important, but not in a formal way, not to collect the certificates, not to have only high grades, to become nervous about that. It is a continuous mentality to say, what I don't know yet, I like to taste it. So I have a small snippet. I just taste it. I read a book that I don't understand, but I get the main ideas. I don't need to fully understand yet. I don't need to memorize it already. We have a famous saying, it's called learning by heart. And it was meant as learning by, you could reproduce it without the text even. But what I mean learning by heart is that you make a relationship to what you want to learn. So if you have a new job, you need to learn so many things. You need to learn about products, about procedures, about your colleagues, about customers, and that can be paralyzing. Now, how to survive? That is a playful mindset. Not criticizing yourself too much, but be open, risk-taking, going out of the comfort zone, and be very open to your colleagues so that they can really help you. If we are too much defensive, try to hide what you don't understand yet, then it's damaging. It is spoiling the mind, and then you have burnout. So playing and working is really a good marriage, I think. It's not the same as gaming. Gaming is to win. You do that really to relax the mind, but playing is more the open mindset to experiment. Again, so I give you this picture, and I would like to know your, we don't have the time to make it interactive, but normally I ask the audience, please, what do you see here? And what's the meaning of the picture? This is an exemplar of what I call conceptual thinking, because you can see it's a bit hilarious, it's a bit critical, it's a bit skeptical also. You could see, I estimate, you also say that this is criticizing urbanization. You cannot grow the buildings by planting them. You cannot make a city by planting the buildings. That's not how a city is growing. And of course, you could ask, what's the man doing here? He's walking away with the building. Is he just bringing it to the city, and what is he doing there? So it's a typical mind opener. It's making your curiosity, what is in fact urbanization? So what I did, I made a task. This is about polity, and that was one of my PhD works. But this is about urban planning. So I made a task for primary school students and even go to secondary school. It's about living, working, leisure, service, mobility in a city. What is a good city? You have to cope with many dimensions like these ones. This is my work when I was a young guy, 25 something, leading students to make an urban planning task. And what happens? They all got an individual task. They had to make their own private solution. And after that, you can see the blocks represent all the meanings, all the purposes of a city. And here I explain what they need to take care of. But then they go together. They go to one new planning task, and they need to make one common solution. And here's where the interesting thing happens, because they have their idea about what they made by themselves. Now they have to negotiate with their schoolmates how to make the best city, combining all the knowledge. So what we found out, that was a counterintuitive result, that student groups with a high heterogeneity, because of social sense, because of age even, because of gender, because of learning style, when the group is very diverse, the communication became more rich, because it was not so obvious to just mention the names, living, working, but they were talking, what does it mean, living? What does it mean, work? What is a good work? How can I defend the distance to travel every day between living and working? So that was a more philosophical tendency, like you could say. And even you can see that among experts, when they make a solution, experts have a certain level of solution, certain quality of result. If you add some novices, people who have no clue, they start asking so-called stupid questions, naive questions. And what then happens, the experts need to become more explicit what they mean in the concepts, and the result of the outcomes becomes higher because of so-called naive questions. And that was the type of lesson. You can see here the constructions like road systems, like streets, like parks, and it is still a nice tool, I think. We use it a lot. This is a conceptual representation. It's about concept mapping itself, and you can see the diameter of the nodes is changing when you add more lines. Of course, you have in degree and out degree. You can see it as a directed graph. And this is a typical representation that you can use after the sessions as a reflection tool to learn what you learned. Metacognition, we call it. Know about your knowledge. Again, London Underground. And here you see a group of teachers from Italy, from Spoleto, working on the same urban planning task. And they liked it a lot, and I hear they apply it several times in their own school, in their own teaching. And you can see I made a very simple tool by paper, pieces of paper, and they can exercise. Mostly it is about the values in life. So what's the real value of living quality, neighborhood, leisure, leisure time, etc. That is what is typically coming out. It's value, making values more in an explicit way. That's useful for learning the complex tools like planning, like problem solving. Here you see the project in the lunch, and here I'm teaching to students, the students of the same teachers that came also to the Netherlands recently. Always the flag of Erasmus, we are proud of that. These are schematic drawings by the students. You see, these are different representations. And I need another lecture to talk about it. But in general, we could say that when the representations are rich and flexible, then it promotes the real thinking. So we call it conceptual thinking. I now go to a next dimension. It is, for instance, if we talk about the smart city, we can say that what we call smart cities, they are more a problem than a solution, because if you make more sensors, more analytic tools, you come in the phase that there are decision makers who say, what do I do with a very busy street? Do I disencourage the drivers to take this road, but take another road? Should I avoid any cars? Should I walk? Should I leave the cars here, whatever? So it becomes really a moral question, how to do the solution. There's this very simple saying by Kenneth Dunn: if students don't learn the way we teach them, let's teach them the way they learn. And that had a huge impact to teacher training in the Netherlands, because the consequence was that to make a good teacher, you need to allow the future teacher to learn in the way like they should let their students learn. So they should become students, first of all. They should be learners. Before becoming a good teacher, you need to be a good learner by yourself. Then you can demonstrate that you are more tolerant about learning aspects. Why does the learning happen? In practical sense, in the jobs, the learning happens via the mobile phone. Not so much with the laptop or the desktop. It happens when you get a message of your colleague says, please take care because something is happening with the system or whatever. So the learning is in the network. Now you can ask in a philosophical way, you can ask if Plato or Socrates would have had a connection like the World Wide Web, should they have had different ideas about where are the pure ideas? Like Plato says, the pure ideas are far away. Here we are in the midst of the mud, and we need to cope with opaque ideas, with fake ideas. Would that be the case for Plato? We see that working awareness is collaborative. We call it it's a distributed process. So you can see we are all working in a big system. We are just hitting one key, that's our own estimation, our thinking, but it's working in a big network. For instance, designing a bridge was typically the case for one engineer. It was Mr. Eiffel, for instance, who made the nice tower in Paris, you know, or it was Mr. Bugier, or so they were solo players. We see now to make a bridge, there are maybe 5 or 10 disciplines needed to make an ideal bridge. It's from traffic, it's from safety, it's from aesthetics, it's from construction, not unimportant, of course, but we see it's a collaborative, multidisciplinary way that we need. And we can say that identity relies on connectivity rather than mobility. So we need high density of interfacing. The critique by many people who say, yes, the social media, they dissipate too much time. You can see beginning of the 20th century, people were reading the newspaper. They didn't want to talk in the morning. They were all very much solo players. So there's not really a criticism now that social media are taking away too much time. In the previous part, you can see Italy in the 15th century. They would have a primitive cinema. It's a black box, Laterna Magica. It's like the light source. The light is coming from the top, and you could see some puppets moving. And what was interesting, it was not in the box. That was just the start. Interesting process was between the spectators. The people would start talking, gossiping. They were talking about what they experience, how they feel, what they want to change in the city. So it was a kind of catalytic element. The media are catalytic to what is in the people. The people were, of course, when the telephone arrived, this is switchboard, PABX we could call it, but it was manual. And if you made a phone call, you had to call to the post office, and then the person would say, yes, what do you want? Who do you want to speak to? And then they make the connection with the patch panel. And the typical thing what happened is that the ladies became only later, because first the men, they were the technological people, but they started to mingle in the conversation. And it was not polite, and it was not desirable. So the ladies were more polite. The problem was, of course, that after the conversation, because they could hear the conversation, they would talk afterwards about the conversation, which was another problem. But we see, and that's my summary before I close, we see there are two main dimensions. The vertical dimension is that society goes up from nomadic to sedentary to industrial, to society 4.0. That's where we see the computers coming in, and we see now the smart society, where there's so much, let's say, synergy between the persons, between the groups. That is a highly densely society. That's one. The horizontal development is from individual makers to industry. That goes up, and now we have industry 4.0. It means that we use machine learning, we use deep learning, and the question is, if these two dimensions, if they develop further, we take the diagonal and we go from education, like we did in schools. Education becomes more and more open, it becomes more problem solving, and it will become lifelong learning. That means there is no end. Learning is endemic to living. And I would like to stop here and open the floor to your questions. I open the floor back to the chairman, Oksana. Thanks for listening.